Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, May 14th, and I will be giving you your weekly update with respect to coronavirus in Sonoma County. So I'm going to start with our case statistics. Right now, we have 133 active cases of COVID-19 in Sonoma County. We have 200 recovered cases, fatalities, and 4 fatalities, and then 337 cases total. With respect to the age range of those cases, we have 53 cases from 0 to 14, 166 cases from 18 to 49, we have 73 cases from age 50 to 64, and we have 45 cases that are 65 and over. With respect to the geographic distribution, we are again still seeing cases throughout Sonoma County with a concentration in Central County. So we have 24 cases cumulatively North County, 52 for South County, 21 for East County, 20 for West County, and 219 in Central County. And we do have 1 under investigation. With respect to gender, we are seeing still slightly more female than male cases. So we have 161 cases that are males and 176 female cases. Now here's something that I really want to take a moment to talk about, and that is what we are seeing with respect to racial and ethnic disparities in our community in terms of COVID-19 impacts. So when we actually started to take the sort of race and ethnicity of confirmed positive cases and document that and kind of take statistics on that, since then we have had 58.9% of our positives are actually from our Latinx community. And actually the really frightening thing about that is that our Latinx community only represents 27.2% of our total population. So we are seeing extreme disproportionate impacts that are really hitting our Latinx community harder than it is sort of our white community. So with respect to race and ethnicity and confirmed positives, 32.6% of the confirmed positives are white, and white people represent 64% of the population. So again, what we're seeing actually is that we have obviously a lower percentage of white people who have been confirmed positive, that even though we represent 64.7% of the total population. All right, moving along, we do have 5.5% of the confirmed positives have taken place in the Asian or Pacific Islander part of our community, and that represents 5.1% of our total population. So that's actually fairly comparable. And then other, so anyone who classified themselves as other ethnically is 3%, and that actually is spot on with 3% of our total population. So again, just a sort of quick breakdown, even though white people represent about 2/3 of the residents two-thirds of the people in Sonoma County, they only represent about 1/3 of the confirmed positive cases. Whereas we have a community that is 27.2% Latinx, and we are seeing 58.9% of the positives in the Latinx community. So this means that we really need to work hard to address this disparity in our community. Unfortunately, it's not only on the health side, it's also on the income side that we are seeing a tremendously disproportionate impact to our Latinx community in Sonoma County. So we actually did a survey at First 5, which is the organization that I serve on that focuses on 0 to 5 education. And we did a survey of parents to see, how are you doing? And have you actually experienced any negative impacts financially as a result of COVID-19? So in the English families that we surveyed, 10% of them had lost all of their income, 24% of them had had their income reduced, and 66% of them had not been financially impacted by COVID-19. Now let's compare that to the Spanish-speaking families that we surveyed. With the Spanish-speaking families that we surveyed, 43% had lost all of their income, 23% had had their income reduced, and 34% had experienced no change in income. So it was literally the inverse of what we had seen in the English-speaking community, where in the English-speaking families, 2/3 had had no change. With the Spanish-speaking families, 2/3 had actually experienced a substantial or total loss of their income. So we really need to work on this as a community, and we really need to, quite frankly, do a better job of providing outreach, providing access to testing, providing access to medical care, and providing access to financial resources. This is a huge problem, and I think that in many ways, this pandemic is showcasing racial inequalities and racial injustices that have existed for decades in Sonoma County. And so we really need to step up, and we need to address this as a community, or we're not going to get through this as a community, right? I really do believe that we all have to get through this together. And so that means taking care of our members of our community who are most vulnerable. And right now, we are seeing that our Latinx community members are most vulnerable financially as well as medically. And so we need to make sure that we are investing and that we are, investing in resources to support those communities, and that we're also making sure that they have access to real-time information about COVID-19. All right, moving on to the events of today. So today we did issue another modification to our shelter-in-place order. This amendment is going to allow for a lot of new businesses to come back online tomorrow. So those businesses include, number one, childcare facilities for non-essential workforce. I've heard from a lot of childcare providers that they often have, the kids that they serve, and that's a sort of set number of children, but not all of the children were actually the children of essential workers. And so the childcare providers in some instances could not reopen because they didn't have enough kids to actually be able to operate and not have just experience a loss in revenue for not being able to, make enough money in order to pay their personnel. So this will hopefully allow some of our childcare facilities to come back online and provide that service for parents. Number two, residential and janitorial or cleaning services. So that means that we will have those services available for residents. Number three, car washes. Number four, pet groomers. Number five, dog walking services. And then we have kind of a host of different outdoor amenities and activities. So we've got outdoor museums, open air galleries, botanical gardens, outdoor exhibition spaces. All of those are allowed. And the next one that is a really big one is office workspaces where telecommuting is not possible. So it's really critical. If you can telecommute, if your business is able to function by telecommuting, then please, do not open your offices. But if you have no other option, you can go ahead and move forward with reopening that office space. And if you go on socoemergency.org, there's a link to the public health order. And in that link, there are actually links to the best management practices that you need to implement in order to open any of those businesses. You can also check out sonomaedb.org, and they also have a list to best management practices in order to be able to move forward with reopening your businesses. So those are the main announcements for today. We do have those changes coming, and I also wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about this issue of a quote waiver with respect to the public health officer and the state criteria and all of this stuff, because I think that there's a lot of confusion about this right now. First of all, waiver is the wrong word, right? We do not want to waive public health requirements. We do not want to sacrifice public health in the interest of the economy. But what the actual appropriate word is an attestation, right? This would be something from our public health officer, and she would literally be attesting to the state that she feels that we have met the criteria, in some way, or that there are sort of other appropriate criteria that we should use to measure in order to be able to move forward with reopening. So I do not support reopening Sonoma County's economy without the blessing of our public health officer. However, if our public health officer believes that there are better sort of metrics, better criteria, and a different set of data in order to move forward with reopening, then I absolutely support that. At the end of the day, local control is the best way of getting through a pandemic. That is clear. That is the guidance of the World Health Organization, the guidance of the CDC. So if there are ways that we can actually take state criteria or sort of, state standards where we have a state that is trying to be governed by we've got one governor, right? And he is tasked with governing everything from Alpine County, population 1,100, and Los Angeles County, population 10 million, right? And then there's Sonoma County, where about 500,000 people, right? That's a huge range. And so really the best thing that we can do is have local plans that are driven by local data, local capacity, and the unique needs of our local economy, which are very different, right? You look at an office space in Sonoma County, you might have, 5 people in a single family home that's been repurposed as an office where everyone has their own room. And then you look at a place like San Francisco where you could have office space that has thousands of people all sharing a common elevator. That's a very different level of risk. And so that's why having locally developed plans that are really rooted in, what is our local testing capacity? What is our local healthcare capacity? What is our data telling us? And then having epidemiologists, right, review that. So we've got Dr. Mace. We actually are even onboarding another epidemiologist just to review this potential attestation to send it up to the state. So that's where I actually fundamentally believe that it is great to have local control, and why I support moving forward with the attestation process. It is not about waiving health requirements. It is not about saying, to hell with public health, we're going to just go ahead and open all the doors. Not at all, right? This is about a thoughtful, data-driven local process under the guidance of our public health officer. With that, I'm going to turn it over to questions and see if I can scroll up to the top. Y'all are talking pretty fast, so let me see if I can get to the first question. All right, question from Harvey. Do we have any idea when vacation rentals can open? We do not. And I will note that phase 2 does not include tourism lodging, right? So when we're looking at the state and being able to possibly move into a deeper phase 2, which is something that we could do through the attestation process or through being able to meet the state's criteria, that does not include lodging for tourism right now. It includes things like the ability to have dine-in opportunities in restaurants utilizing safe distancing and protocols. So I do not unfortunately have a crystal ball with respect to when vacation rentals can reopen. Question, is there a breakdown by city? We do not have a breakdown by city, but we do have that regional breakdown that is available on the SoCoEmergency.org and the dashboard that we've got there. I hear from Merlin that Merlin lost all of their income, and I'm very sorry about that. And please let me know if they're, we're really working hard to try to connect small businesses to resources as well as individuals to resources. And I know that some people have struggled to try to get through EDD. I actually have a phone number. Our state senator, Mike McGuire, his office has been extremely helpful with getting people through the EDD process. So feel free to reach out to us and we can refer you over to them and see if we can get you the help you deserve. All right, questions. Scrolling through Sonoma Sheriff's stance on the shelter in place. I can't speak to the Sonoma Sheriff's stance on the shelter in place. I think that you should definitely ask our elected Sheriff Mark Essick. I can say that when it comes to, in particular, the decisions that we're making around the coastline, we have been consulting with our law enforcement partners to make sure that whatever policy goes into place is ultimately enforceable. And so that's not just the sheriff, that's also CHP, it's also state parks rangers, and of course, regional parks. So when we're looking at those kinds of strategies that are going to require more enforcement, we are definitely making sure that our law enforcement partners are at the table. Comment saying, please let salons open. We are licensed by the state board in sanitation and disinfection. We are desperate to get back to work. I recognize that, and I recognize that there are a number of entities that do have, specialties in sanitation and disinfection. I've heard the same thing from tattoo artists, also actually from preschools and daycare providers who also have very stringent disinfection protocols. Ultimately, those businesses that require prolonged contact and close contact between people are at a higher risk of transmission for COVID-19. And I believe that that is why they are in a later phase of the governor's reopening plan. So right now we are not allowed to reopen personal services. That is expressly written on the state website. We cannot move forward with that. And if we actually were to move forward with that as a local jurisdiction, kind of flipping the bird to the state, it's actually a really bad idea because the state has threatened to withhold tens of millions of dollars of funding, of disaster relief funding. So unfortunately, we cannot afford to violate the state's wishes, even if we wanted to. And I think that in this case, Dr. Mace does acknowledge that there are best management practices that can be put into place, but that also is falling into that higher category in terms of the duration of the contact and also the proximity of the contact. The way that Dr. Mace has explained it to me is that, when we look at risk, we're really looking at three things, right? The number of people that can come into contact with one another, how close those people are, and then what is the duration of the time that they are spending together. And so even though, salons, depending on it, you could have fewer number of people, if you're looking at, for instance, longer, procedures, but it does sort of hit that high risk level with respect to the proximity and the duration of contact. Got a comment from Ron. Thank you for the hard work and for allowing pet grooming. Yes, I think there are going to be a lot of happy pets and hopefully also, a lot of parents who can have a little bit of relief from childcare. So that will, I think, be helpful for everyone. I know that Maya, my dog, who right now has a terrible mohawk, is, I'm sure, going to be grateful to get that fixed soon. All right. Question from Michael. What's the soonest you see hotels opening for tourism? I am going to just go out on a limb and say that there are different types of lodging facilities, and they will likely be phased in over time. I have had this conversation with Dr. Mace. I've been approached, for instance, by, owner of Cassini Ranch, right, out in Duncan's Mills. And they say, well, for us, it could be potentially a very low risk activity. We could only allow people to bring their own, RVs and campers, right, out to our property, and only ones that have bathrooms that are, self-contained. And that would really dramatically reduce any kind of, person-to-person contact or even person-to-facility contact. So I cannot say when tourism will reopen, but I can say that I'm pretty sure that it will happen in phases, right? So those lower risk activities might be phased in first, with things like hotels, happening later. And I've actually even heard some conversations regarding the fact that you might have hotels, that have, for instance, hallways and elevators opening later, or maybe a little bit more gradually, right, than those that are, say, little small cottages each with their own separate entrance and can be entered into from the outdoors. So there are going to be phases of this thing, and it's not going to happen all at once. But unfortunately, I do not have information at this point in time. I don't have a crystal ball on tourism. A question from Mike Lindell: why didn't Dr. Mace cut her public appearances and receive a pay raise? So Dr. Mace is still making public appearances. She has a huge demand on her time right now. The woman is truly working, sun up to well past sundown, and we're asking a lot of her, right? She's going to a lot of different town hall meetings. She's, participating in a lot of different conversations around different sectors. She's trying to review the documents that are being provided Economic Development Board with those best management protocols for our small businesses to make sure that they have her blessing before they go forward with reopening. So she is still appearing publicly, but I think that maybe instead of every day, I think it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday now. And this was really just about time management and trying to make sure that she was also accessible for, say, media interviews and things. And so it's a tough balance. So let's see. And with respect to a pay raise, I don't believe that there has been a pay raise for Dr. Mace, but I would have to look into that. So moving forward to the next questions. Do you have any indication of when we will be able to start visiting close friends and family in low-risk groups? That is a great question. And right now, unfortunately, we do not have a timeline for that. And I know that there is still that, kind of ban on gathering outside of family units is still in effect. Question: do you think we should prioritize vacation rentals over hotels, given that they are safer than hotels for social distancing? Again, I do think that we will see a phasing in of tourist activities over time. And so I would imagine that something like a single family home that's being utilized as a vacation rental would be a lower risk than, say, a large scale hotel that all shares a common hallway. Question: do you see hotels being able to open for Memorial Day weekend? I will be candid. No, I do not think that we are going to see hotels being open for Memorial Day weekend. Again, we're still focused on phase 2 reopening. Memorial Day is just around the corner, and so that's a phase 3 or later for hotel and tourism, and so we are not even meeting fully the metrics for the advanced phase 2, let alone phase 3. So we're waiting for information from the state. Let's see, moving along. Question: what's going to be done with $100,000 that was used for hotels to be used for first responders that didn't get used? I actually don't know what Anastasio is referring to, and so I would appreciate a little more information with that question. $100,000 that was used for hotels to be used for first responders that didn't get used. I just don't know exactly what you're referring to, so I would appreciate a little more information on that one. We do have the alternative care site set up. That is at Sonoma State, and that can be utilized for anyone who needs to self-quarantine, whether they are a first responder, whether they are a member of the community, whether they are unsheltered, whether they are a healthcare worker. Anyone who is required to self-isolate who does not have the ability to do so at home does have access to that alternate care site. Question: potential dates the coastal parks will reopen. That is a great question, and we are going to be reopening coastal parks in phases. As you know, right now we are currently in the phase where we are only allowing walk or bike in traffic from locals, right? So that is going to be just like the way we did with inland. So starting with inland, right? A few weeks ago, we opened up the parks, but you could only walk or bike to the ones that are nearest to your house. And I recognize that caused a lot of frustration and, questions about equity that were absolutely the right questions to be asking. But the good news is that now our parks are open to vehicular traffic. And so it was all part of this sort of phased plan to gradually reopen, as we determine what is safe. And so we'll be doing the exact same thing out along the coast, right? So we're starting with that walk and bike in, and then we do hope that we will be able to phase in vehicular access next. I do anticipate that we will probably stay with that midday closure, right? So right now you can access the beaches either before 11 a.m. or after 5 p.m. And I anticipate that once we open up beaches for, me to drive, I would love to go there and, be able to park at Doran and be able to take my kids for a walk on the beach. That will also probably stay those hours in order to encourage, first of all, letting more people get there, right? Because you'll have sort of a, crew of folks who go in the morning, a crew of folks who will go in the evening, and then also just to discourage out of area tourists from coming and, staking out the beach all day. So what I am hearing with respect to dates, and please don't hold me to this because we have some work that we still need to do. We still need to meet with our first responders. We still need to circle back with enforcement partners and coordinate closely with state parks. We are trying to also stay in line with the County of Marin. Right now, the County of Marin has the same policy that we do with respect to, you can only walk or bike into their coastal parks. Marin is probably, what I'm hearing, not going to open up to vehicular traffic until after Memorial Day. So it might be that kind of a similar timeline for Sonoma County, but I would anticipate that you'll see Marin and Sonoma County probably trying to be close in terms of reopening, because we know that we both are very close to the Bay Area, and there are going to be a lot of people who want to come to both of our coastlines. So we figure if we sort of do it at the same time, then you're not going to wind up with completely overwhelming Marin or completely overwhelming Sonoma. So my hope is that, within the next few weeks, we will have an ability to reopen the Sonoma County coastline. But we still need to check in with our local fire districts and make sure that they are ready and that they've got enough PPE and everything for our first responders to keep them safe. Question, does shelter in place expire tomorrow? No, shelter in place does not expire tomorrow. What does happen tomorrow is a new shelter in place order takes effect, which actually allows for more businesses to reopen. Question, information about recreational areas on school grounds. So recreational areas on school grounds, you can, that counts as a park. This is a big question that I have because I actually live within walking distance of a high school, right? And my kids love to go and fly kites and run around and throw frisbees just out on the grass. That is now allowed, right? So if your school is functioning as your local park, you can go ahead and utilize that as a park space. There are, still criteria around playgrounds are not supposed to be utilized, tables and barbecues. I don't think there are any barbecues at schools, but there certainly are tables. So those things are still off limits, but you absolutely can move forward with just enjoying school grounds as a recreational area. And you could also drive there if you need to, assuming that your school has an open parking lot. I happen to live next to a school that never has its parking lot locked. Question from Velvet. Daycares can now accept non-essential workers. Yes, that is correct. Daycares can now accept non-essential workers, which will hopefully help some of our daycares and preschools to reopen for business, because not everyone had enough essential worker students to be able to actually fill their classrooms. So, question from Sandra. What can we do about the rentals every weekend? My street is filled with cars. Everyone heading to the river in Guerneville with inner tube Safeway bags. Let them go to the beach instead of our small town. I recognize that this is very challenging. And we actually were just discussing this issue at our Russian River MAC meeting earlier this evening. And if you want, you can go back and, fast forward through that, and you can hear directly from both Regional Parks Director Bert Whitaker, as well as Sergeant Juan Valencia from the Sheriff's Office to talk a little bit about enforcement and how we're going about enforcement. I'm not going to lie to you and say that we have a perfect answer. We have a sort of rural level of staffing, both, at the Sheriff's Office, at our regional parks, our amazing partners, over at the CHP. And we're going to have a challenge this summer. And that challenge is going to be that everyone is still going to want to come to the river, and it's not going to be safe to have large gatherings or to have a lot of folks, kind of coming together, especially utilizing businesses that are supposed to be closed. So what we can do is we can step up on our messaging, right? I'm gonna be working on signage. I'm gonna be working on, trying to make sure that everyone is aware of the different rules that we have. I've heard a lot of reports from Guerneville about a lot of out-of-towners coming and not utilizing facial coverings. So how can we make sure that there are signs around the community reminding people about facial coverings? Should we maybe go ahead and buy a bunch of facial coverings so that, the deputies can hand them out as a reminder if they see anybody who is not properly wearing their facial covering? But at the end of the day, if you're seeing, rentals that are operating illegally, please do call the Sheriff's non-emergency line, which is 565-2121. Again, that's 707-565-2121. And we just have to keep reporting and keep stepping it up. I do also have a request in, and I understand that County Council is working on it right now, to try to see if we can get code enforcement to assist in this work, and also to provide a little bit more punitive response if we catch vacation rentals that are operating in violation of the public health order. In my opinion, if someone is knowingly, willfully violating the public health order and continuing to operate and bring, out of area tourists when a lot of our businesses are taking the hit and they're closing down, I think that person should lose their ability to have a vacation rental license in Sonoma County. And so we're working on that to try to make sure there are consequences, and that people, I think once they start to hear and learn that there are consequences and they see some people receiving those consequences, hopefully fewer people will violate the public health order. Question, you touched on tourism and how important it is to our county. Any timeline on hotels, wineries, and other tourism-driven businesses being able to open? So unfortunately, again, I do not have a timeline for hotels and other tourist lodging. Wineries are allowed to operate right now. They are classified as an essential business because they are agricultural processing, right? So they're part of our agricultural fabric. With respect to tasting rooms, that might happen sooner than lodging, because that sort of falls into the category that is, with restaurants and retail sales. And so that might be something that comes online earlier than, say, the hotel lodging. But I want to acknowledge the challenges that we are facing in West County in particular. And those challenges are the fact that we have such a tourism-driven, tourism-dependent economy. And, sometimes we love them, sometimes we hate them, but we know that we rely on them for so many of the jobs that our locals have, right? And so on one hand, we're seeing the devastating economic impact, but then on the other hand, I'm also, my email inbox is filled with people who are very fearful of what out of area visitors could bring into our communities and the public health risk that they pose. So that's when I say, that I think it's going to be a challenging summer. That's why, because we have this tension between the economy that relies on tourism and the public health that is currently threatened by tourism. And that's just a really tough dichotomy that we are all living with right now. And I believe that we need to keep moving forward with a really data-driven approach to reopening that protects the public health, right? That doesn't lead us to a dramatic resurgence in cases. So that's why things are being done gradually and, not as fast as some people would like, too fast for others, but we are taking it one step at a time, so that at any point in time, right, we're waiting a couple weeks, we're seeing the impact of that policy before we sort of make any more substantial changes. Question, we need to know when a real partial opening of the beaches will happen. Currently, the beaches are still basically on a lockdown. Most of even the small number of residents can't walk to the beaches. You need to drive. I appreciate that feedback, and we are working on it. And I would anticipate, I guess the governor's phrase, right? He'll say it's days, not weeks, or weeks, not months. This is definitely weeks, not months. But I can't tell you exactly how many weeks, because we really need to make sure that we're talking with our local fire districts and departments before we move forward with that plan. Let's see, question, why can't we use reusable shopping bags that are clean with every use? This just comes down to the fact that unfortunately we can't guarantee that those reusable shopping bags are clean with every use. And I am someone who, is 150% behind reusable shopping bags. I was all about banning the, plastic bags, getting everybody to shift over to canvas. But this is just something where, unfortunately, in the new world that we live in, there is concern for those frontline grocery store workers and handling those bags. And even if you're really amazing at sanitizing your bags, not everybody is. And so that's why reusable shopping bags are not currently recommended. Question, what about all of the open space and fresh air on charter fishing boats with reduced loads and social distancing implemented in practice? Merlin, this is a great question. And actually, you know what? I would love to talk to you because we are currently developing best management plans for a whole host of different industries. I've actually been working with Sonoma Canopy Tours, right? Redwood Alliance, because that's a very unique business, right? There isn't any other ziplining through the redwoods type of business. And similarly, our charter fishing boats are also a fairly unique industry to Sonoma County. So let's follow up. I would love to work with you on best management protocols so that when you're given the green light to reopen for business, that you are ready to go and you've got your social distancing plan and you've got your sanitation plan, and we are ready to get folks out onto the water. So I think that's a really, really great point, and one that we can definitely follow up on. Great question from Kirsty. Can we use this time when less vehicles are on the road to fix our infrastructure? Absolutely. And I'm really hoping that everyone soon is going to be seeing, not as much on the infrastructure side yet, but we will be getting to those paving contracts this summer, I promise. the ditching work, right? We have a lot of mowing and sort of roadside vegetation work that we need to get done. And so, I know TPW has been taking a lot of requests, but if you have any major vegetation management issues that you're seeing along roadsides near you, please let me know, and we will see what we can do to make sure that those areas are mowed and cleared in advance of fire season. Question, tourism is state limited, or do counties have a say over visitors from out of county coming in? Tourism right now in terms of lodging is state limited. So the state is actually not allowing lodging for tourism to be open. And so that's not something that we have any control of over on a local level. And right now you're still supposed to be focusing on essential travel, right? So that would mean, going to a business that is currently open doesn't actually now count as essential travel. Otherwise it's really going to work. Going for essential activities like, food or recreation. All right. Question from Belle. Are gatherings of less than 10 or less than 3 between different households included in phase 3? Can you say anything? And unfortunately, I'm trying to click see more and it's not working. So I apologize. I can't read there. Oh, anything about careful pod mixing, especially for single parent households or other situations that are in need of cooperative arrangements. Thank you. This is a great question, and this is definitely one that I will pass on to Dr. Mace, because I do recognize that this can be very challenging, especially for children, and especially I think for single parent households, and especially if you're not, sending your child to school or to a child care provider for socialization. I can definitely find out if there's any sense of timing for small gatherings. And I have heard about this idea of a pod. So if no one's familiar with this idea of a pod, the idea is that, you pick a couple of friends and you only visit those couple of friends, right? So rather than, those friends then going and visiting with other friends and other friends and other friends, which is how the virus can spread very quickly, you say, you know what? I'm going to basically expand my household by a couple of people, right? And we'll be a pod together. And we will still only go for, essential activities and be very, very careful about sheltering in place, but we will socialize amongst one another. And so I do not have any information about when that timeline could take place, but I can promise that I will look into that and follow up with you and find out if there's a timeline for gatherings. I will say that we did ask a little bit about this with respect to religious services and other things, and Dr. Mace does just feel that at this point is too dangerous, and it could potentially lead to a more rapid spread of COVID-19 to start allowing gatherings. So, question. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a hard time with some of these with the clicking. I don't know. Okay, let's see. I've got one from Annabelle. The more testing we do, the more cases we will see, because we are seeing that the virus has been here for a long time and already worked its way through the community. Likewise, the more testing we do, the more the mortality rate decreases. Let's see. However, Sonoma County deaths are being labeled COVID without a positive test. We are using a test with a high rate of inaccuracy to determine whether people can work or even stay at their homes if positive. Okay, so I'm a little bit confused by this, because we are not, in fact, labeling deaths in Sonoma County COVID-19 without a positive test. So everyone, unfortunately, that we have lost from the disease did test positive for COVID-19 prior to that. Maybe some misinformation that you got a hold of. Also, we do not yet have access to the antibody testing. And the real way to determine who has had this disease in Sonoma County is to run that antibody testing. So we definitely need access to the antibody testing. Again, we have that on order. We still do not have a delivery date for those antibody tests. But when we do, that's how we'll be able to tell, how many folks have had this disease. Let's see. Other questions. So shelter in place is still in effect. Yes, shelter in place is still in effect, but it is in effect with modifications. So if you go to the socoemergency.org website, you will see sort of all of the most recent modifications to the shelter in place order, as well as the original shelter in place order. Question, what programs beside tourism are you discussing for local economic stimulus? We are looking at everything. There is no way that we can limit economic stimulus to just tourism, because I recognize that, a wide variety of our small businesses are being heavily impacted by this pandemic. I was just talking to some business community leaders this afternoon, and they were noting that there's been a huge shift, right, of people who used to work in office spaces now working from home. And so some things that you wouldn't even think about, like dry cleaners. Talk to a local dry cleaner, down 80%, right? Because there's no one coming to work. People aren't getting dressed up, and they're not dropping off their dry cleaning at the, the stores that exist near our, primary areas of workspace in Sonoma County, our office space areas. Similarly, the delis, the sort of, sandwich shops, the taquerias that were located in areas where people used to go work and now they're working from home, all of those small businesses are also suffering. As are actually even the grocery stores, in those areas. You're seeing a significant slowdown in traffic because our patterns have shifted, right? A lot of people are working from home, whereas they used to drive to work and then kind of do things on their lunch break or after work or before work. So we are seeing also impacts to our agricultural industry as well, with the shifting away from restaurant sales. A lot of our actually high-end dairies, right? People who make really beautiful artisanal cheeses that were primarily served at restaurants and not purchased through the grocery store, those folks are hurting. Even Albert Strauss, Strauss Family Creamery, which is amazing, local organic dairy producer that sources from a lot of different local organic dairies in Marin and Sonoma. They've actually had to cut their production by 5% and then 5% again because of a decline in sales. So the impacts, while tourism is hit especially hard because it's been mandatorily shut down, hard stop, you cannot do this, you cannot, function in that industry anymore, they are not the only ones that are hurting right now. So we are looking at any kind of economic stimulus plan that we can, and we are doing a lot of work with our state and federal partners to discuss what kinds of programs we could get to help small businesses. The biggest thing is that we really need the HEROES Act to pass. This is, the Democratic bill that's currently in the House that will offer a lot of relief to state and local governments and could actually give us the tools that we need to implement local relief programs. So that would be really, really helpful. And we're hoping that we can get some traction, but it was a strictly partisan bill, unfortunately. There was no bipartisan support. Republicans did not come out for it, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Senate. Question, is Armstrong Woods open too? And I assume that probably means drive-in traffic. And I did hear from Michelle Luna on the Russian River MAC meeting today. She is the executive director of the Stewards of the Coast in Redwoods. And she did say that Armstrong Woods will be open. So let's see. Moving along. And yeah, I think it opens tomorrow for parking. Let's see, Santa Rosa hotel rooms booked for first responders amid pandemic go largely unused. I can definitely look into this. I appreciate you following up on the question that you had earlier. This was Anastasio who was asking about $100,000 for hotel rooms for first responders. And my understanding was that was something we were looking into, but I didn't think that had actually moved forward because we were moving forward with the alternative care site instead. But I can definitely follow up on that. Thank you. Question from Melissa. If I'm understanding right, Airbnb properties are not supposed to be operating, correct? That is correct, in fact. Question from Marisol. Can you talk about masks and guidelines around them? Absolutely. So the biggest, when we talk about masks, we try to call them facial coverings for just, your sort of everyday average person. And so a facial covering can be really, truly anything that covers your mouth and your nose, right? So you want to make sure it covers both. You see some people walking around like that. That's not helpful at all. It doesn't, a lot of your breath comes out of your nose, so make sure it covers your nose as well. And it can be a bandana. It could be, sort of like one of those gaiter things that you can pull up that's sort of like a neck wrap and, cover that, use that to cover your face. It can be any kind of cloth facial covering that just covers your nose and your mouth. And you need to wear that whenever you go into any kind of business establishment, but also when you're just walking around and expected to come into contact with people. So if you're walking through downtown Guerneville on the sidewalk, you should definitely have your facial covering on. If you are out in a regional park, way out on a trail, you do not have to have your facial covering on, but you could just sort of pull, have that facial covering ready so that you can pull it up if you do see another person walking along the trail with you. And then there are specific guidelines around masking, but I would refer you to the website because I don't want to get that wrong. There are different levels of masks that are required for different types of facilities. So skilled nursing facilities have a certain level of masking required compared to, a hospital or other different facilities. And so that varies from, N95 to surgical masks, and there's sort of a spectrum of solutions for the medical community. But I would refer you to socoemergency.org for additional information on specific masking guidelines. All right, trying to scroll through. Let's see. Great sort of points from Kathleen. Out-of-towners should not be coming because it's a statewide shelter-in-place rule. Absolutely, and rental operator is in violation by allowing any guests. You are correct on that. All right. Finally, gonna scroll through and see if there are any. So I think that this is a question intended to be funny, but I'm going to answer it anyway. The question is, how do you feel about people holding church services in Walmart or Home Depot instead of their actual church? So I do recognize that Walmart and Home Depot are open because they are, providing essential services specifically with respect to food in the case of Walmart, as well as, supplies for your home, and Home Depot obviously for home supplies and hardware that are necessary for home repairs. I do recognize the challenge to our faith-based community by having closed churches. And while I am not on this subcommittee, I want to really commend Supervisor Shirley Zane and Supervisor James Gore for working directly with the faith-based community. I think that we're actually, unique among counties in that we specifically address the need for virtual church services in our shelter-in-place order, because we wanted to make sure that even if people can't come together in a congregate setting, right, that pastors were allowed to go and film in their church if they so chose in order to hold virtual church services. So we are working closely with the faith-based community, and it's an interfaith community, right? So it's all across the spectrum to make sure that we try to address the spiritual needs of our community, even though it's too dangerous right now, unfortunately, for people to come together and worship together in a large room. And I also want to acknowledge Adam Peacock, who is a leader in our local faith-based community, and he actually presented to the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday discussing some of those plans. So please stay connected to your local church if that is part of what helps keep you going. Please do worship, just worship safely, and we look forward to someday being able to come back together and worship all together again. Question. You may have already answered this, but what do you think the time frame is for youth sports like baseball will be able to resume? Unfortunately, I do not have any answers with respect to youth sports. There would probably be a couple different phases again. So, there are conversations around summer camps where you would have the same group of children, right, with the same provider. That is not currently allowed in Sonoma County, but that's kind of one level of risk, right? It's a different level of risk entirely to have, say, actual sports where you would have different kids from different teams coming together. That creates sort of a much greater risk for COVID-19 transmission. So I would expect that sports are something, again, that would be phased in over time on a risk-based approach. One thing I do want to mention is that we are now allowing some sports to be happening within households, right? Sort of low-risk sports. So tennis and pickleball. I just learned that we've got pickleball in the Lower Russian River. Who knew? Are now open, and of course, folks who do golf can go access the golf courses, and those are open as well. And if you've got a soccer ball or you've got a baseball and you want to go and play catch on one of a field that's near you, you're also welcome to partake in that activity. So definitely welcome to practice sports. Just not okay right now to sort of play, between households or groups. All right, other questions. Not vegetation, but we have a county road that is undermined. The county came out and blocked off half the road with cones. And unfortunately, my screen is not working and I'm not able to see. Oh, here we go. After the last few days of rain, the road is worse. How can we get this repair prioritized? Please email us, Bobby. Email me at linda.hopkins@sonoma-county.org. And if it's in the 5th district, we will absolutely follow up and see what we can do, because we want to make sure that road is safe and does not get further undermined. I actually understand that we're supposed to have more rain this weekend, which is crazy, right, for late May, but we want to make sure that your road is buttoned up and does not suffer further damage. All right, let's see if there are any last questions. Yes, so great. Leo posted that there is updated information on Armstrong Woods at stewardscr.org, which is great. Oh, great question. Last question. Here we go from James. What about the summer dams? So this is a really, really critical issue for the Lower Russian River. And we hosted a meeting. Was it earlier this week? It's all a blur at this point. But we had the water agency who had modeling data. We had myself, James Gore from the 4th District. We had Fire Chief Mark Hine representing Russian River Fire Protection District. We had Russian River Parks and Rec District. We had Sweetwater Springs Water District. And we had Vacation Beach Fire Safe Council, right? So we all sort of got into a virtual room, and we had Dr. Mace, our public health officer, to discuss the issue of the summer dams. And what became clear over the course of that meeting is that while the dams are technically installed for recreation purposes, they actually also serve some other really critical functions in the community. Number one is fire suppression, right? So if you have a river that's substantially narrower and substantially shallower, which is what we would see if we didn't have the dams installed, it would be much more difficult and actually impossible for a helicopter to be able to scoop water in the event that there was fire suppression needed in the lower Russian River area. So having a wider, deeper river actually enables us to, perform an air attack on a fire if it's needed. And we don't have a lot of locations in the lower Russian River that actually do afford, large ponds of water where you can go in and easily scoop for an air attack on a wildland fire. Number two, it's also clear that there is likely an ancillary benefit to drinking water supplies for Sweetwater Springs Water District, and that without the dams in, there might actually be an increase in cost of pumping for Sweetwater Springs in particular. So we're going to be having a follow-up meeting with Dr. Mays and County Council to formalize and finalize a decision, but it became clear over the course of that meeting that there are some critical functions and not just tourism that are provided by the lower Russian River dams. The same is not true for the Memorial Beach Dam, right? With the Memorial Beach Dam, there's actually not a huge benefit to fire suppression because up there are actually a lot of different areas, agricultural ponds, former old gravel ponds that allow for that scooping, right, for an air attack for a fire. And also up there, the city of Healdsburg, their wells are not anywhere close to where that ponding is taking place from the Memorial Beach Dam. So I believe that Burt Whitaker is recommending, and Dr. Mace will recommend not installing the Memorial Beach Dam, but we are going to have that follow-up meeting because there are those critical functions being provided by those lower Russian River dams beyond just tourism. So stay tuned for the formal word, but we should have that next week. All right, thank you all for spending some time. Oh, actually, one last question, which I think is so important, which is there a plan in place for school funding? With the schools being closed from the fires and now this pandemic, and I can only imagine they will be hurting pretty bad. Unfortunately, I have really sad news regarding school funding, and that is that schools are looking at really substantial cuts to their funding from the state. The state is tens of billions of dollars in the hole as a result of this pandemic, and all of the wonderful work that Governor Jerry Brown did socking away money in a rainy day fund, which a lot of local governments, by the way, we really resented that because we're like, here we are broke in local government land. You're sitting there on, billions of dollars of state money. Well, it was really, truly the prudent thing to do. And so they're lucky that they have some of that money to be able to, sort of soften the blow a little bit. But unfortunately, schools are going to be looking at pretty draconian cuts next year. And so I think it's going to